Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and welcome to my walkthrough for E3 Savage, Eden's Gate Inundation on the Savage difficulty. Apologies that this video is not going to be like my formal guides have been. I've been doing these walkthroughs for this tier because my week 1 footage is what I consider relatively unusable between the camera and the Twitch chat and the alerts popping up. So this is a way for me to discuss week 1 strategies, how we managed to get through a clear, and of course, these strategies are likely to get better and be adapted into more modern strategies as the weeks go on. So just consider this like a basic week 1 guideline of the fight. But it's going to be a pretty long video, so let's get started. So Inundation Savage, of course, going up against Leviathan like you did in normal mode. The markers you see that we have down here on the screen, markers that we went with for various phases. A, B, C, and D were stack points for one mechanic, and we use A and B for another mechanic that we got later on. 1 and 2 is for second Tsunami, and I'll go over those markers and why we have them there a little bit later. But feel free to move them around. I've seen groups do all sorts of different markers for the Leviathan fight to make calling different things easier, for them. So start of the fight, big thing, keep in mind is a lot of the stuff from normal mode is still here and has maybe been adjusted or just made harder. Of course, Tidal Roar, just room-wide damage. The big thing, Tank Buster, Rip Current, is going to be a double Tank Buster. Now, you can tank swap during the cast bar so that each hit hits someone different, kind of like Spear of Paradise in Eden Prime. We opted into, for the most part, just using tank invulns on Rip Current because there really wasn't much another thing for our tanks to use tank invulns on. So we had our Warrior use Home Gang for the first one, our Paladin Hallowed for the second, our Warrior Home Gang for the third, and then we had them alternate on the fourth. Depending on which tanks you bring and how long the invuln cooldowns are, will determine how you really want to handle Rip Current. But it's simple enough to just tank swap during the cast, as long as you make sure it doesn't actually aim towards the group at any point. Leviathan is also auto-attacking the top 2 aggro targets, so you want to make sure your tanks are the ones taking those hits, and for multiple reasons on top of that. Now, right off the bat, Tidal Wave into destroying the sides of the arena. Now, luckily for every Tidal Wave, you should have Arm's Length or Surecast. So with this Undersea Quake and the Tidal Wave, if you don't want to use those, you'd have to identify which side the Tidal Wave is coming from. And then you'd have to get to the side of the arena now that it's a little thinner and stand right along the edge. It knocks you pretty much completely to the other side if you're not using Arm's Length or Surecast. But it's simple enough. Just make sure you don't pop it too early. The Tidal Wave does take quite a bit to actually cast. Right about now is when I usually hit Arm's Length during the Undersea Quake cast, and then it has about 1 or 2 seconds left when it actually hits. Now, Temporary Current has a, I guess, delayed AoE marker, so you really need to watch what direction Leviathan's heads are going for Temporary Current on normal mode, and just try to get to the spot a little bit sooner. Whether it be left or right, you just need to be able to recognize. And of course, the back of the room is safe during Temporary Current as well. Now, Drenching Pulse is pretty much the same at this point as it was in normal mode. It's a bunch of AoE markers, and then everybody gets a marker after the fact. So just as long as nobody overlaps with these Temporary Currents, or I'm sorry, with those Drenching Pulse AoEs, you should generally be fine. We have it set the way that we're doing it right here for a later phase, so we're just trying to maintain consistency during this. But it doesn't matter that much for this first one. Right after those go off is a Temporary Current, though, so you need to make sure that after you're dropping those, you're quickly getting to the Temporary Current location, because, well, otherwise you're gonna die. It's not gonna go well for you. I think that goes without saying. So one last time, drop these, and again, that'll matter more later with the Freak Waves. And then get to either the front or the back, just as long as you're not in the Temporary Current area. And you're all set. You're already 15% into the fight, and doing good. Now, the next thing that he's going to do is Maelstrom, which is a good bit faster and a little bit more dangerous on normal, but it's still largely recognizable. There's puddles on the ground that will grow, and you need to stay out of them. Now, in normal mode, those puddles gave you Dropsy, which just did damage over time. In Savage, those puddles are going to give you a heavy effect. So if you step in them, it becomes a lot harder to actually dodge the dive bombs that are coming out of Leviathan for this. And on this first one, there's going to be 2 dives. So first, you want to identify where the first dive is going to come from. You can see it's coming from the northwest side of the room, and it's aiming south. And then after we identify where the second one is, there should be one area that's 100% safe that we don't have to move once we're in. But because they come out in a delayed fashion, you have time to dodge the first one and then dodge the second one if you're more comfortable with that. Later on, this will get a little more complicated, but not by much. And then after it's done, Leviathan pops up back on the north side of the room, which he likes to hang out in the most part. We have another Tidal Wave here, and then we are going to go into Tsunami, which is a little bit different for this first one from normal mode. There's definitely a lot more coordination that goes into the Tsunamis on Savage, especially the second one. It's very much like a mini Hello World if you did O12 Savage back in the previous expansion. Not nearly as annoying as Hello World, though. So for this one, there's going to be 8 people with 2 markers. Now, there's 2 split damage markers on the healers. There's 1 knockback marker, which is the one I actually have in this case, the Sundering Waters marker, which looks like a straight line down the middle. And then everyone else has donuts, as well as a new one called, I don't have it on this one. I'll get the name for it later. But the one with the small dot right here, which I think is like splashing or something like that. This one right here, where my mouse cursor is hovering over. This one needs to be dispelled. This essentially will destroy you if you allow it to hit you. But it's the point blank. It's just the point blank AoE explosion from normal mode. But because it gives you a magic vuln and you have to split damage from the ones with the healers, it's essentially death if that doesn't fall off of you. So in order to dispel it, you actually need to get hit with Sundering Waters, which is a giant wave that comes out of the front of whoever has it. So you're going to see me position in such a way here that it'll make a lot more sense once you actually see it. So here I'm actually standing behind everyone and pushing them forward. You don't have to do it this way. I've seen plenty of groups stick this person right under the boss facing backwards. We just did it because everyone was able to stay in melee range without having to move forward. I think it's actually way safer to have the person with Sundering Water be under Leviathan in this case and facing towards the back of the room and having everybody move up. But this just made it so our casters didn't have to move up and everyone could just stand still and then move after the fact. So realistically, whichever way you're more comfortable with, I just think that this runs a much higher risk of somebody being a little too far forward and actually knocking them off of the arena. So I'd consider this the riskier way of going about doing it, pushing them forward instead of pushing them backward. But either way, what you're going to see right here, I'll let it play out. I need to look forward, and you're going to see this giant wave form in front of me and push everyone forward. So that's what Sundering Water does when it wears off. It creates this giant wall that pushes people forward. But when you're hit by it, it actually dispels that debuff that I said is going to get you killed. So you want to hit everyone with it, essentially. And then after that, we are breaking up into 2 groups of 4. 1 tank, 1 healer, and 2 DPS. Because Leviathan's going to break the middle of the room, and for the sake of consistency later in the fight as well, it's nice to have a healer and a tank on both sides, as well as 2 DPS on both sides. So it's just an easy way to break up the group. Everyone's been knocked forward here, and now we're going to go to our separate sides to avoid Undersea Quake. Now, the remaining debuffs that you see here, 6 of them are donut AoEs, so everyone needs to stay pretty tightly stacked after this next current that's going to happen. And the remaining 2, again, are the 2 healers, each with a split damage AoE. So, again, one reason why you want 1 healer on each side is that. Other than that, for this first phase, it's not really all too relevant. So now for the temporary current, we're either going to have to dodge forward or back. So this was the first thing we really used the markers for. We used it to designate a stack point in regards to where it was safe for everyone to stand for this temporary current plus split damage AoE. Because we really didn't want someone straight off too far to the side and actually getting clipped by the donut AoE that comes out of everyone here. I will say that this marker could technically be a little bit further forward to reduce the downtime that a melee may have. You can see there's this line right here for the temporary current, so we could be as close as here to reduce downtime. This was just, again, just a prog setting, and it's super consistent, and it's symmetrical, and it looks nice. So that is why we decided to do our markers exactly like that. It's very safe, and perfectly reasonable for anyone to be doing in prog. And isn't that bad for a loss, because the melees are going to have to leave the boss if they get a bad temporary current anyway. Right after that damage is a Tidal Roar and a Rip Current. We are having our Paladin hallowed this one over on the other side. Again, you could split it and have them go separate, but for us, we just didn't do it that way. And then it's the other temporary current, whichever one you did first, the boss is going to do the opposite one here. And at this point, you want the boss around the HP percentage that we have it. Around 71% is a pretty safe place to have it. You'll be racing the enrage, but you're on pace for a potential kill. So if you have it any lower than that, then you're just getting better and better. A little bit of a side commentary. My opener got really screwed on this because I ate food right when we started the countdown, and it screwed a lot of my standard steps. So I'm actually surprised that this went as well as it did. Now, the big new thing for Leviathan is essentially a woke phase from the weapons refrain. He's going to use Refreshing Shower, I believe it's called. I'll wait for it to start casting again. Here we go. Yeah, Refreshing Shower. And this is going to enhance Leviathan's attacks. Some of them happen double. Some of them are brand new. Some of them are enhanced. There's new debuffs. It's essentially an entirely different phase from anything that you did in normal mode. Tidal Roar becomes Tidal Rage. It's just the room-wide AoE still. You treat it exactly the same as you would Tidal Roar. Rip Current is still exactly the same. Tidal Wave still works exactly the same. And Undersea Quake still works exactly the same. So this is, you know, arm's length and surecast the Tidal Wave plus Undersea Quake like you did just a couple minutes ago in the very first part of the fight. Now, the big change here that gets people the first time is double temporary current. After the first one goes off, Leviathan will immediately do a second one, so you need to make sure you're moving into the other safe zone, whether you're in the front or the back of the room. Now, next up we have Drenching Pulse. Now, the positions we used for Drenching Pulse earlier were because of the woke phase for Leviathan here. So we create 2 lines of 4. I haven't seen how other people are doing this. This is just how we ended up deciding that we wanted to do it. We create 2 lines of 4 AoEs. And that's because now that Leviathan is woken, these are going to leave puddles on the ground. And if you step in the puddle, it's like a 20 to 30k damage per tick dropsy, and it's just not a good time. Actually, I think it's even stronger than that. I think it's like 40 to 50k. So you don't want to have to step in it. But we are going to have to double dodge a temporary current at the same time. So we need to make sure these aren't taking up the space where we would be ideally dodging a temporary current. So you see us drop these in the 2 lines right here, and then immediately go and dodge temporary current. Some of us are going forward, some of us are going back. Basically, if we were the front 4, it's much quicker for us to dodge temporary current by going forward a little bit. And the 2 people who are a little bit further back, it's quicker for them to dodge the ones in the back of the room. So that's the only reason why we're split into 2 groups of 4 here. And it's still a double temporary current. So we dodge the first one, dodge the second one, bam. Just keep that in mind every time you see temporary current, regardless of what phase it is in, it is going to happen twice. Okay, so now we come to Maelstrom again. This was the dive bombs earlier, and realistically, the only thing that's changed here is there's an extra one. So you can't just pick one safe section of the room. You need to go to one safe section and then move into a second safe section. Again, if you step in these puddles, they heavy you. Rescue can be really useful for saving party members here. As a dancer, obviously I have an Avant, so that free range movement skill is also very useful, but keep in mind to use those things. You know, your backflips on Dragoon, your rescues, your Enavants, whatever you have if you do happen to get clipped by one, because it's not a guaranteed death. Also, sprint. So because it's 3 dives, we have to recognize where the first dive is. We saw it in the northwest side of the room by A. The second one's going through B. So our first safe section is actually going to be C. But then there's going to be a third one that's going to go directly through C. So we need to move to where the first dive bomb actually came from. So we're going to go to C first. We're going to see, no pun intended, that there is a dive bomb coming right through here. So then we just move to where the first dive bomb was and make sure to continue watching out for those puddles. Also, while you don't get drops here from standing in the puddles, if you are consistently standing in them, they do damage over time. So you definitely don't want to get caught in a puddle for more than a tick if you do accidentally step into one. After that is another Tidal Rage. So if nobody got hit, nobody stepped in the puddles, it's Tidal Rage. Nobody should have taken damage in the last like 25 seconds. This Rip Current, again, we're tank and bowling this. We're having the Warrior do it. Again, you can tank swap. I've said it every time. But do as you will, I suppose. Now the next one is going to be a fun one. And I always forget the exact name of it, so I got to wait for it to start casting right here. Stormy Horizon. So this is essentially a little Pantocrator from Omega. If you did the previous raid tier, I've made some comparisons to that already. There's going to be AoEs that are following all the party members. They're going to drop one by one as time passes, and you're going to want to bait them in such a way that they are easy to dodge, as well as out of the way for another mechanic that you're going to have to do at the same time. So we decided to all start on A and rotate around the boss's hitbox. This made it so everyone could stay in melee range to keep 100% uptime, and then it was just a matter of casters optimizing their usage of any of their skills that allow them to deal damage on the go, whether it be swift casts, you know, a red mage melee combo, triple cast, any of that stuff that they might have. So we're all going to start here, and we're going to start baiting AoE circles one at a time. There's also going to be persistent room-wide damage happening throughout the entirety of Stormy Horizon. It's not dealing much to us right now because it only does a little bit per tick, but it is something to keep in mind, especially because there's going to be some a pretty large amount of raid-wide damage coming after this. So after the first 2 of these circles drop, one of your 2 tanks is actually going to get a flare marker, and because there's also going to be a temporary current at the same time, they need to go to the back of the room and dodge temporary current back there, while the rest of the group is dodging temporary current on the front side of the room. And again, it is a double temporary current. So our tank, you'll see him break off from the group, and he's going to go backwards. Now at this point, after the 3rd circle drops, Leviathan starts casting the first part of double temporary current. And we need to identify which side of the room is safe. So I can already see that his head is going towards A, so we're obviously just going to keep rotating towards B. However, of course, if we needed to go back to A, that's where concern comes in with this sort of dodge method right here, as opposed to starting maybe under the boss's hitbox and then moving outward, which would be something that works perfectly fine as well. For this, if we had gotten it in a situation where we needed to dodge towards A, on this current, we'd be moving forward and then to the left from where we are right now. So this is unfortunately probably a better example if I had pulled some other footage for this kind of walkthrough. This is the kind of thing this walkthrough doesn't do super well, but it gives you an idea of what you need to do at the very least. So we're just going to keep baiting these, going all the way over to B, and then make sure that people don't just bolt for the safe zone. Because what ends up happening when people just bolt for the safe zone because they've identified it while the circles are still dropping is they end up covering a majority of the safe area from the first temporary current, and it can make it really awkward to dodge for the second temporary current. So we'll watch that entire motion through one more time, starting from here. We start at A, rotating around. On the third one, we see the flare. And then on the fourth one, we see where the temporary current is being aimed. We all go over here. It gets a little messy, but then we kind of cheat towards the inside and dodge towards the other side here. Now, in the back of the room, the tank who had the flare is, again, dodging the double temporary currents. He's just dodging it in the back of the room. Now, right after the double temporary current is what we like to call Aqua Morn. It's a repeated hit of just split damage that you can see right here. It's actually not that powerful. You can see it's only dealing like 14,000 damage a hit, but there is that persistent room-wide damage and a tidal rage that comes right after that. And so you just need to make sure that you have something to mitigate this and you're keeping the healing up. As you can see, we have a Sacred Soil going through this, and you know, I think we had like an Afflatch's Misery and a Size go through that, but it doesn't require that much healing. And then after that, it's a double Tidal Rage while also taking that damage over time across the rest of the room. You can see right there that the passive damage is maybe 4,500, 5,000. So not a whole lot, just something worth recognizing at the very least. Now, after that, you've got a little bit of time to do DPS here, and then you've got two final mechanics really that are going to test the group. It's going to be about maintaining uptime and making sure people don't screw up watching the very, very intense amount of debuffs that they're going to get. Now, we do get a Drenching Pulse here. Now, this is just like the other one. It is going to drop puddles again, but there's actually going to be an undersea quake that breaks the left and right side of the arena. So we actually like to try and drop these in such a way that they cover 0 of the inner area that we're going to have to work with. You'll see what I mean here in a second. These drop, and maybe they reach in a little bit, but they're really a non-issue. They disappear before the first mechanic actually happens. You can see like that set in particular is like still very much inside, but it's not going to negatively affect the mechanic at all. It's just nice to get them out of the way, you know, because we have the space to do so. Now, second Tsunami, when you have this the smaller inside track, is a lot riskier than the first Tsunami you did, and there's a lot more debuffs than there were before. The first thing to note is that everyone still has that small circle, that one that needs to be dispelled by being knocked back specifically by Sundering Waters, the straight line down debuff. But there's a couple of new ones. Returning from normal mode is actually the generic knockback one, the one that just knocks people away from the person's current location, and I actually am the one who got that. So what we did here is we sent the person with that directly forward. Now, unlike Sundering Waters, this one doesn't matter the direction the person's facing, and I probably should have mentioned that more explicitly. I said it, but I didn't really put much emphasis on it. That Sundering Waters specifically requires you to be looking in the direction you want to knock people. I want to put more emphasis on that because it's going to matter a lot in this phase in particular, way more than it did in the earlier one. Whereas the knockback one I have is just going to be outward from my location. So I can keep DPSing the boss as long as everyone makes sure they get knocked back. Bam, everyone's alive. It's fine. Now, the next thing is that one healer and one DPS are going to have a split damage AoE. This is the same split damage AoE you did in the first Tsunami. However, now it's on a DPS and a healer. So what we did is we assigned 1 and 2, one for the DPS, one for the healer. So we assigned 2 as the healer split damage marker and 1 as the DPS split damage marker. Now, for the most part, that's pretty simple. 3 of the DPS can go to the one side on 1, and the 2 healers can go to 2. We actually had it so that the person who has the first knockback, the one that I had, goes to the healer side. We found that was probably the easiest way to organize it because it just meant all 3 of the DPS who weren't doing the knockback knew exactly where to go. The 2 healers knew, and it was just up to that one person to remember which side they actually belonged on. Now, there is a mechanic right after this that took me a second to realize how it worked. I had to go through some footage, and I had to have some discussions with my Twitch chat to realize exactly how this next one selected the mechanic. That was the split damage AoE that I just mentioned right there. Because next is going to be these two conal AoEs you see fire towards the tanks, essentially. Now, that AoE hits immensely hard. So it is essentially a tank buster. So after looking through a bit of footage and also having some discussion with my Twitch chat, I realized that this was specifically targeting the people furthest away. Because we had just innately been putting our tanks towards the front of the boss here. Because we assumed that they were just these were just targeting them in the first place. But no, it had so happened that it actually targets the people who are furthest away, and that led to some deaths when we were actually learning the fight initially. So that's why our tanks didn't like hang back with us to split that AoE, which would have been, a little bit easier on the damage that we took, but you saw we survived with plenty of health. Just make sure you're using things like tacticians, suckers, whatever you have to actually mitigate the split damage hit, and it allows your tanks to get into position for this specific AoE a little bit faster. Now, as for the AoE marker in particular that you're looking for, there is going to be one healer and one DPS that have these triangle AoEs, or these triangle debuffs that you can see on the debuff bar. Those are the people who are going to fire this AoE at the people furthest away. So, watching through it again after we do the knockback, you'll see that after I do this knockback and after we split up for the split damage AoE, the people with the triangle AoEs are standing in front, so they don't hit anybody else with these big tank busters that are essentially going to be aimed. I call them tank busters, but I've seen tanks literally take 0 from these. They'll just kill non-tanks. It does a lot of damage. I've been hit for like 140,000 by those things as a non-tank before. So now that the tanks have taken those hits, we now have to worry about 2 remaining things. We have 2 Sundering Waters, which we're going to use to dispel the small debuffs that we have remaining. And we have a new debuff, a big circle, which is actually something that is always going to end up on one of the tanks. So first we have to deal with Sundering Water number 1. So the way we did this is we had the DPS. This will always be a DPS and a tank with the Sundering Water, assuming everyone was alive for the actual cast of Tsunami. We have the DPS go forward first. So they're going to go under the boss and look back towards us. Again, it is super important that people remember that Sundering Water depends on the direction you are facing. It will knock people in that direction. This one's kind of crooked, so I think this one gets a little scary here for a second because you can just push people off if you do it incorrectly. But what it does mean, if you're someone who uses face target, for example, and you try using a skill on the boss while you're trying to also aim this towards the back of the room, it can lead to problems. It can lead to you essentially aiming it forward and not doing anything. Now, to be fair, I think you could still do this fine with only one of the Sundering Waters hitting the group, but we decided to use both Sundering Waters, one to push us back, and then one to actually push us forward again to get away from the one remaining debuff that we haven't dealt with yet. I think that you can honestly just do this with one pushing everyone forward, having the other one just go off to the side, but that's just me. I don't know how people will adjust to that in the later weeks, but you can see that this pushes us all back and it gets rid of all the small debuffs. And now there's only the one big one on the tank. And there actually, somebody did have theirs missed. And oh, you know what? This is why you can't do that. Okay, so I just realized why you can't do it. I just said. Because the person with the Sundering Water also had a small and they couldn't dispel their own. See, this is why we do these walkthroughs like this. Because sometimes you just realize midway through while you're talking why it doesn't work the way that you just said it could work in future weeks. So the one remaining person who still has one needs to get it dispelled. So that's why you use both of them. We were just doing it because it made sense because of the pushback going forward, but so it goes to show you how much you just weren't paying attention when you were actually progging. So then the other tank with the remaining Sundering Water pushes us all back forward. It gets rid of the remaining debuff that's on that monk in this case. And then the tank with the big circle just goes all the way to the back of the room while everyone else gets up front. Because they just essentially get a giant explosion that will kill people if they're not tanks. So just to play it through one more time, we'll walk through the entire thing for anyone who would just like a quick refresher. So on Tsunami Cast, we recognize who gets what. I have the first knockback marker. It's the shortest debuff that you'll get, and that's going to be on a DPS every time. Then we have 2 groups of 3. a healer group and a DPS group. The 2 healers and the first knockback DPS go to one side, and all 3 of the remaining DPS to the other, while the tanks position forward for the next mechanic. Make sure to mitigate this. Bam, takes the hit. The person with the triangle debuff, make sure to stand the forwardmost in the stat group so that they can aim that AoE towards the tanks. And it'll go to the person furthest away, so it'll look like this little cross section every time. Now, the DPS with Sundering Water, there will always be a DPS and a tank. The order to which you do this doesn't actually matter. We just chose to make the DPS do it first. The DPS who does it first will dispel everyone except themselves with Sundering Water. And then the tank will knock everyone forward. The tank with the Sundering Water will knock everyone forward and dispel the 1 remaining debuff that was on the person who did the first knockback. And at the same time, the other tank with the big circle goes all the way to the back of the room. And then there's explodes, they take a bunch of damage, and you're done with Tsunami. You do have a double temporary current here, so just after all that, don't screw this up, because, you know, the other part prior to it was a lot more difficult. Double temporary current, and bam, you're done with second Tsunami. And you realistically, at this point, just have 1 major mechanic left in Leviathan Savage. So there's going to be a double Tidal Rage here, and then a Rip Current. We don't have any tank invulns available at this point, with our comp and with the way we've been handling them thus far. So we actually do a straight tank swap. So you'll actually get to see what Rip Current looks like if you're not tank invulning it here. They do it in a way that I think is very visually appealing. You see them both go to the sides of the group right here. Provoke mid-cast, first hit, second hit. And yes, you do need to mitigate those individual hits because they hit very, very hard. You have a little bit of time to DPS here, and then you're going to go into the final set of mechanics for Leviathan. And then after that, it's a straight heal and DPS check. So Rolling Pulse is going to place, it's first of all, everyone's going to stack right in front of the boss, bait those AoEs so they're out of the way. Now, in each group, we already separated each side of the room into 1 tank, 1 healer, and 2 DPS. This essentially ensures that this mechanic in particular goes smoother than, or goes as smooth as possible, because you're going to need that kind of setup for this to work ideally. So both the tanks are going to get flare markers. So each tank goes to the back side of their assigned side of the room with their group. Whereas everyone else is going to go forward onto these markers. You can see the healers have these split damage markers. And then the DPS help the healers split that. So tanks in the back of the room, the middle of the arena is destroyed, and the other 3 people stack. So again, this is another reason why we're using these ABCD markers in these 4 quarters, because it makes for very easy to identify places for people to stack up and do these mechanics. Now, after that, you need to assign 2 people to be responsible for being the furthest people away from Leviathan, 1 person on each side of the room, because Leviathan's going to target that person with this thin tether that you see right here. It's best if you make it someone who is hypermobile, like a ranged physical, or somebody who has a lot of available mobility in terms of their cooldowns or their general job design, because that way it'll make sure you keep as much DPS uptime as possible while doing this. We opted into we had 2 ranged physical, made the most sense to make myself and the machinist do it. Now, on top of that, both the tanks are going to get hit repeatedly with an attack, so you want them as far forward on the platform as possible. So you see those big AoEs they're being hit by right there? Yeah, you just want to make sure that those don't hit anybody else except the tank. Now, the person with this tether is going to spawn 4 puddles back to back. And these boiling waters need to be erupted by players or they explode on the group and will wipe everyone, essentially. On top of that, you need to make sure you don't drop 2 of them too close to each other. If they touch each other, they'll also pulse out an explosion upon landing, which is going to mean a really bad time for your group. So what we did is we tried to get the people baiting these circles close to melee range so melees can make sure they're keeping uptime during this. It's super important to make sure you're paying attention to these little optimizations for DPS check's sake. We dropped the first puddle here, and we basically assigned the healer on each side to do one and the remaining DPS on each side to do one. And you need to make sure they are individually detonating these. Now, on top of that, you cannot drop these circles on top of a player because it will knock them off. We learned that the hard way as well. So we dropped them in this kind of like diagonal pattern in a sense, so that where the healer is right now, you can see him casting, is basically the center point for the 2 people who are going to be responsible for this. And then I drop it around them in a sense. So I drop the first one and you can see the red mage goes in and detonates it. Takes a bit of damage, gets a magic vuln stack. He moves out of the way. I drop the third one and the healer detonates the second one. And the same thing is happening on the other side. He detonates that one. So you do need to make sure there is healing in between all of this. And after the 4th one, you're all set. All the mechanics stop and you get a double temporary current. Now, unlike every temporary current prior, though, you need to be dodging forward and then back, or back and then forward, because it is, again, a double, and I cut it really close there. So one quick playthrough of the entire phase again, just so you can see it play out, because once you're through this, you are all set. Rolling Pulse, everyone baits, tanks to the back of the room, DPS and healers assigned to each side, stack in the front, and split the damage. Mitigate this, heal it, you know the drill. 2 people are assigned to be the people furthest away who are going to bait the puddles. They're going to get this little line tether right here when Black Smokers finishes casting. Is that what it was actually called? That's what I thought it was called. Yeah, Black Smokers. Okay. And then they're going to drop these one at a time while the tanks make sure to stay out of the way. One at a time. First one is detonated. Second one's dropped. Second one's detonated. Third one's dropped. Fourth one's dropped. Third one's detonated. Then fourth one's detonated. Tanks are out of the way, taking damage the whole time. Then double temporary current, and you've seen the whole fight. That's it. Now it's just a matter of healing through the remaining damage that you're going to take and burning Leviathan down. If you have it about 15, 16%, you know, about where we are, we kill it pretty much on Enrage with this. Any lower than this, and you are well and away ahead of Enrage. There is one Tidal Rage here before the arena completely reforms. Make sure each individual group has mitigation and healing. So if you have a white mage on one side, you probably want to stick something like a paladin or something with a AoE damage mitigation for magic damage on one side, and then your shield healer can, for the most part, take care of it on the other side, because you want to make sure you also have plenty of mitigation for this last part right here. So what Leviathan is going to do is going to cast the Calm, then going to hit you with a bunch of AoEs, 3 Tidal Rages, and then is going to cast the Storm. And it took me way too long to realize that Leviathan casts the Calm before the Storm. Puns. These Tidal Rages will just hit harder and harder. Leviathan gets a stacking damage. And there is also the passive damage that you're taking, like you were during the Stormy Horizon phase. So there is a little bit of extra damage being taken here that goes up gradually as well, just because, you know, Leviathan's getting those gradually increased damage stacks. And then the Stormcast is really, really long. You can see it right here. It is a really, really long cast time. Like, we had a 3.9% when it started. And not only is the Storm a really long cast, but it also has a really long animation before it actually deals the damage. So much so that what I thought was not going to be a kill ended up actually being a fairly reasonable kill here. You can see like that. And we still had actually another maybe second and a half, 2 seconds before we actually got that. And that's Leviathan Extreme. I don't think pugs are going to have too much trouble with it once, you know, more guides, and whether it be text or video or walkthroughs or whatever medium they use to actually understand the fight. I don't see why it should be super difficult. It's very, very set. DPS with this debuff goes here. Healer with this debuff goes there. It's set in stone, so much so you don't even need to watch the other players. You just need to make sure you're going where you're supposed to go. And that's all that really matters for this fight. A lot of personal responsibility that affects the lives of everyone else in the party. But a really fun fight all the same. And as for the actual loot, I'm too busy pondering something right here to actually open my loot table. But let me see if we actually cut ahead enough for me to actually get it in frame, because I'm just sitting there pondering something instead of looking at the loot list like an idiot. There we go. So we got Eden Grace foot, we got Eden Grace legs, and we got the Solvent, which will upgrade a 460 Tombstone weapon to 470, and we got a Twine, which will upgrade a primary armor piece, mostly left side except for belt, Tombstone piece from 460 to 470. I don't know if there's any other loot on this table. I don't think there is. 2 dropped hand and head. This one dropped boots and legs, and I think that belt is also part of 2. But either way, foot and legs is what we got, plus the other stuff. And it's the coffers like it has been before. Hopefully, that'll help anyone who's looking to get into Leviathan Savage. Again, apologies for the very long-winded means of doing this, but it makes me able to do these with week 1 footage that is otherwise unusable. So I very much appreciate those of you who actually watch this video all the way through to try and understand why we approach certain things and how it actually comes out to a win in a week 1 victory. So anyway, that's going to be a wrap for this video. Apologies that it's a couple days late after the clear, but better late than never. We'll be doing formal guides in the following weeks once I have better footage for that. But I'm going to get back to my Twitch stream and not going into Titan Savage for quite some hours still. And I will see all of you in the next video. So thanks for watching, and until then, take care.